Tools were scattered across the workbench as a voice announced his success. He asked the girl to try, and she agreed. Putting on the glasses, she was surprised and trembled with excitement. The boy asked about the result. The girl said she could see everything. After adjusting her new glasses, she noted her vision was perfectly clear. Turning to Lord Arthur, she called it amazing. The boy smiled at the news. This was the start of the young man's story. Morning arrived, and Arthur woke up and stretched. Born into this world, he was a reincarnated being. The boy kept busy with household chores. At first, he was surprised to find the reincarnation they had been talking about so much, and after 5 years in this world, he felt nostalgic for his past life, discovered he could cheat, and tried many things in this life. He tried many different things, unlocking statuses, using skills drawn from reality, and applying enhancements. Sad about his results, the boy looked into a water-filled barrel, saw his reflection, and sighed when he realized he was only 5 years old. Born to his mother Martina and the Marquis of Weugenel, his parents had neither love nor a marriage of convenience. The crown prince's wedding started it all, and the Marquis expected the next step to be the birth of an heir. Although he already had a legal wife and an heir to strengthen his ties to the royal family, he began surrounding himself with mistresses who would bear valuable children. Noble blood was always in demand, so he sought out struggling noble families. My mother's family was among them. In return for having her debts paid, my mother entered the Marquis house. Things did not go as planned. A harsh male voice said the newborn son had no value, called him defective, and said the women who bore him were worthless, so the protagonist and his mother were returned to the Viscount's house. Although the Roman 6 account seemed puzzled, he accepted them. Living with his mother taught the hero many things. He learned about his family's situation, his mother, and the world's magic. It was only then that he realized why they called him defective. Most people in this world are born with magic, which has 6 attributes: fire, wind, water, earth, light, and darkness. Magic crackled through her like static electricity, but she could use only the magic of her own attribute. Arthur realized he had no attribute, so he could not use magic, and he did not understand why he had not been a mage in his past life. Maids were gossiping about him, asking if they should throw him out like garbage because his mother was considered defective, and their situation in the Viscount's household worsened every day, though his mother had always loved him. And then there was a sharp knock at the door, and someone asked if Martina was free. That was Grandpa, Arthur's mother told him, and the man announced he had found a husband for his daughter so she would be happy. Martina asked what would become of Arthur now. Grandfather spoke in a stern voice. He said his son had to be sent to an orphanage. Mother and son froze. Martina said everything was clear to her. She fell silent for a moment. The protagonist lowered his head and realized there was nothing they could do. It was bound to happen because it was defective. He lowered his head. 3 days later, his mother left their home. The young man asked if she was sure of her plans. She said she had already made arrangements with the Viscount. He said that was not what he had meant, but understood her reasons and did not interrupt. They were traveling to a village on Baron Merle's estate, where their mother's friend, who had married the Baron's heir, offered them lodging for a small fee. The boy said he needed to study alchemy, because that was where his magic could be used. Even without an attribute, he was determined not to lose the skills he'd honed. Clenching his fists, he concentrated. Long hours in the library were spent studying literature and exploring possible paths for development. That led him to discover alchemy. In this world, alchemy was a method for processing, shaping, extracting, and heating materials, and it required no attribute. After reading this, Arthur said everything would work out for him, but reality proved harsher. Alchemy depended on reagents and matrices. Each application required its own set. They proved very expensive. Most alchemists earned their living by making potions. Many people needed the potions, so prices had to stay low to keep both alchemists and buyers profitable, and to replenish the ruler's coffers so he could supply the townspeople. With no support and not yet able to make potions, the young man grew sad. Creating potions requires ingredients and water infused with attribute magic. Without that attribute, the hero could not create a potion himself. He turned to material alchemy because refining required no attribute and allowed him to create items from his past life. Then a new problem appeared. The sensors were expensive. The boy felt another blow, like he'd been hit on the head with a heavy object. Arthur started looking for ways to cut the cost of the matrices. The rare metals that conduct magic could not be swapped for cheaper materials. He needed to learn their true purpose, and then an idea came to him. The matrices were only required to draw magic circles precisely, so if he could draw the circles directly with magic, the matrices would no longer be needed. A new problem appeared. He could not see the magic. relying only on his senses would warp the circle and make it fail. He had no idea what to do. His mother asked if everything was okay. Arthur stood his ground because he needed to make the magic visible. Using his knowledge of conversion, hardness, and viscosity, he went to work. A natural magical fog glowed. He decided recreating the conditions would make it work. Humidity and temperature changes caused the fog. To do this, he needed to create conditions that concentrated the magic: humidity, hardness, viscosity, and temperature. Without warning, he formed a magical mist his mother had never seen before, named it Lude, surprised her by revealing it was internal magic, and used it to activate the magic circle, taking a step closer to becoming an alchemist. Looking at his mother, he resolved to make her as happy as possible. Mom tapped her son Art's shoulder and told him to wake up, saying they had already arrived. Their new home gleamed with cleanliness. The hero saw a girl ahead who asked whether she was Martin. The woman said her name was Stefana and that the Baron had sent her. A mark on the maid's neck caught the protagonist's eye. It was meant for surveillance and protection. Martina told Stefana she was pleased to meet her. They lived like that for 2 years in Helmendorf. Standing in the field, his mother asked Art if he would be all right from that day on. Art smiled and said he was fine. June arrived with the wheat harvest and taxes due, and their small field left Stefana and her mother struggling, so she asked a friend for help. Tying sheaves of wheat was the young man's job. He was unhappy with his body. Arthur was not used to using physical force. The wheat was being dried, threshed, and packed for taxes. Farmers were taxed per head. The harvester checked the field for any irregularities. A crop failure or a family illness could affect the field's condition. A young man appeared ahead, and the hero asked who he was. Katie, the village tax collector, examined him closely and seemed to understand everything. Then someone suddenly called out for Tina. The protagonist disliked seeing the arrogant village chief's son, Audikil, who asked if the two women were struggling and promised to help them this year, but was annoying and kept bothering the protagonist's mother. Audikil returned. Last year he only watched, but this time he paid too much attention to his mother and raised concern. Martina refused his offer to help, and when he told his future wife not to be shy, she was surprised. The man said they needed to talk about the wedding date, but the woman didn't understand what he meant. He brightened, added that Martina was being modest as usual, and suggested they reschedule the talk for another day. The mother and son were confused by what had happened, and Martina turned to Art. She asked what he'd do if Audikil became his father. He said he might run away. Mom laughed. She said they'd always be together, but the young man never intended to marry her. Stefana asked what had happened while he was in the capital. Her mother said she didn't know and claimed they had only exchanged greetings, but the village elder said she had agreed, leaving Stefana angry and confused. Arthur brushed off Audikil's words as nonsense. The hero suggested asking Kadith to mediate and formally refuse. Martina worried it would burden him. The young man weighed this, but if he asked the villagers they might be biased, so Stefana said she would speak with Mr. Kadith. She recognized him from the Baron's house. That was fair. Martina asked to do it herself. Her friend agreed, and they continued harvesting together while Arthur cheered. After a few days, everyone agreed the work was finished, and it was time to go to the meeting. At the main hut, they found the sage already expecting them, and he only asked if Lord Katie was present, and was surprised that he was not negotiating the wedding. Realizing he had probably made a mistake, the protagonist knew that among the commoners anyone who announced a marriage to a village elder or priest was treated as an enemy, and now he was about to announce his refusal. Stefana said she would lead the negotiations. The man shouted that a servant had no business interfering. The girl explained she was the Baron's servant. He was surprised. Martina said her orders were to protect Martina. The boy understood. Martina said that, first, she will not marry Audikil. Shaking his head, the boy turned to Tina and said he understood her concerns, but could not wait because he needed some air. The hero couldn't tell which air they meant. The mother insisted she had not been proposed to and had not consented. A thump on the table demanded that it stop. A tickle cried that he had proposed and she had answered, and he did not understand why. It was true that she had deceived them. Katie suddenly told everyone to calm down. He spoke to the prefects but apologized to them. Martina continued by asking when and where he had proposed. Arthur said his mother looked very tense. Nautical grew so serious, she started to worry. The boy's mother looked at him, and he smiled, saying the only thing he could do was cheer her up and take her hand. Audikil started by saying his father told him it was time to get married, so he turned to Tina, whom he had long admired. Tina cut in and explained why he thought he liked her. A man thumped his chest and shouted that another girl had said she wouldn't smile at anyone she didn't like. Martina didn't know which girl he meant. then everyone realized it was a misunderstanding. Martina said she didn't care what happened in the brothel, but if a smile caused a misunderstanding, she would see them as insects from then on. The village chief and his son said they were terrified. Katie asked Audihel for the proposal details. He said he had asked permission to pick a flower, as people say nowadays. Katie confirmed her consent. Martina explained she had assumed he meant flowers, so she had given her permission. The village chief asked why she was not thinking about the future, saying she would think about it when necessary. She tightened her grip on her son's hand, and the heroine said her son would be the one to take away her future, and that she would not marry Audihel. The man shouted at her to stop making fun of him. Little Star didn't dare contradict him. He said she'd forgotten how much she owed him for the help he'd given. Audihel began shouting that she was a bad girl. Katie called it discrimination. The village chief suddenly shouted that he was thinking about his son. Stefana said there was nothing more to discuss. She had already decided. There was no proposal and no agreement. The girl decided to end it. The girl asked to have the report delivered to the Baron. Katiath asked about the mayor. Stefano said it was unnecessary and that everyone might be emotional. They seemed to have resolved the conflict. Now a rift separated them from the village elder's family, but the key fact was that Arthur's mother was unharmed. 2 weeks after the wedding rush, Autochil had visited only once, bringing a bouquet of large flowers. Martina cried out, fearing he would trample their land again, and after that he was never seen again. Arthur was relieved that Autochil wasn't a masochist. That day the boy was thrashing wheat and sighed as he sifted the millet. He wished they could mechanize those implements. After thrashing, they had to start harvesting the grain. Martina asked Stefana to go ahead. Stefana agreed. They both used wind magic, one copying the other. Realizing he had no magic, the boy's task became packing the dirty wheat. 6 of the 15 sacks were taken as taxes. Cadet was busy taking inventory. Arthur, carrying the heavy sack, still at least wanted to build a thrashing machine. His memories of a past life made him seem able to do this. He suggested they collect materials for farming tools. His mother laughed, saying it was too early for him to do that, and the boy agreed because it seemed logical. Even if Stefan had taught him fencing earlier, his strength still would not have been enough to get into the forest. Stefana could have handled it alone, but she could not tell him how to gather the things. Not knowing exactly what was in the grove, the hero began to think his wanderings were limited to the area around the house. Then he noticed something to the side and went closer to take a look. It was amber, and the tree's thick, resin-laced bark radiated warmth. Tasting it, the boy groaned, and when he found it completely unfit to eat, an idea came to him to make gem honey from it. Gem honey was rare, but women avoided it because of the insects inside, so it sold cheaply. There was another option. If he sold them to a collector, he could make a little money, so he began thinking about the coins. Aware that amber is a fossil, he did not know how to obtain it because it forms by compression or drying. Arthur figured he had nothing to lose, so he pulled out a small knife and experimented with his materialization skill. A young man began carefully collecting every drop of resin that ran from the bark of a large tree. After 30 minutes, he took a small glass, deciding it would be enough. Separating the impurities was necessary. This was his first alchemy outside training. After several deep breaths, he decided to build an outer sphere circuit first, then an inner purification circuit. Meant to block outside influences and keep the effect inside, he decided to fill the sphere with resin. First, they had to remove the impurities. Arthur channeled magic into the internal purification circuit, then held the sphere and erased it. He then removed it and drew an extraction diagram. He removed and separated the moisture, leaving dried resin, and the hero held a small lump of stone in his hands, amazed at how well he'd done it. The stone suddenly crumbled, and the protagonist knew he had failed because simply removing the water and drying it had not made it strong enough. He decided to try both pressure and extraction at once. The magic circle had only one pattern and one effect, a sphere pattern and a technique pattern. He changed tactics by redrawing the patterns. That prevented pressure extraction from being used immediately. You could apply several techniques at once by putting multiple technique diagrams into a single circle, but that disrupted the balance between the spheres and the techniques. He should have stacked the circles like a cube. Arthur realized that would make the spheres overlap too. Then it occurred to him that this wasn't what he was supposed to do. He could use the spheres' techniques one at a time, so a more flexible method was needed, and the news stunned him. The books were written for matrices and lab work, but he chose not to follow their rules. He devised a way to connect up to 9 schematic techniques to the schema's central sphere and called it a compound magic circle. They set a rematch for the gemstone honey. The young man sketched a diagram of purification, pressure, and extraction. The circle proved functional. The hero laughed, saying the result was almost too perfect and could use some refinement. After his first experiment creating honey gemstone, Arthur ran countless trials and eventually reached stable production and launched mass production. He began making them non-stop in his spare time and hid the extras in the barn. Some of them became enormous. Martina stepped up behind him and asked what made the beetle trapped in the gem look so huge. Startled, the boy jumped when he saw his mother. It was all made of resin, he said. Martina was surprised that his alchemy had made it possible. She asked whether he had shown it to anyone else. The hero shook his head. His mother asked him to keep it a secret and told him his creation was worth 5 gold pieces, which stunned Arthur because he hadn't thought it was so valuable, and he wondered whether others could reproduce it. Kneeling before her son, the mother met his eyes and held his hand. She asked if he'd thought about his future. Pausing, he realized he hadn't given it any thought. His main wish was to make his mother happy. He knew only alchemy and still lacked sufficient knowledge, so he told his mother he wanted to enter the Academy of Nobility. Only in the capital could one study alchemy, at the private academy for the nobility. Admission was only possible with a recommendation from a noble family. For him, a man with no visible attributes, this world seemed out of reach. His mother still asked how serious he was, and the boy firmly confirmed his intentions. Placing her hand over her heart, the mother said it was his choice. They had to move quickly, leaving everything in her care. Arthur was startled by his mother's sudden plan and felt uneasy. Several weeks later, at their mother's request, they arrived in the county capital of Maristat. Martina told her son that her immediate plans were to meet the Baron, sell the honey gems, and buy a servant who would also act as a bodyguard. The heroine also had a personal errand. She needed to contact an acquaintance who had probably become an adventurer, which surprised the boy until his mother explained it. Their stay here would be brief. Arthur was amazed that this man, once a nobleman, was doing this work. Getting to the county capital was difficult, and when Martina learned about the honey gems, she immediately decided they had to leave. Paid merchants carried them, while a guard of merchant adventurers kept goblins and gangs of thieves at bay along the way. In a spacious room, a mother and her son sat sipping tea when the door opened. Stefana came in and said she was back, and she was told to tell them to come see them tomorrow morning. Smiling at her, Martina noted how quickly everything had been arranged. The maid said they had a brief window for an audience even though it normally took 2 weeks, making it a rare chance, and the young man began preparing for the next day, unable to understand why his mother wanted to meet the Baron. Martina asked Arthur and Stefana to wait inside the gazebo for her. The maid entered and asked the woman to wait there for her. Martina sat on the sofa in the spacious room. A man entered and apologized for the wait. Martina greeted him and said she was glad he was well. He replied that the most important thing was that she stay safe. He told the girl that, based on Katie's report, Stefana had been helpful to her. Martina remembered Otakil's visit. He apologized for interrupting and told her she needed to be aware of how others saw her. Martina wondered how others saw her. Closing her eyes, she knew her noble upbringing made her stand out in a village of commoners. Worried about keeping her clothes clean, she said it made things difficult, and the Baron agreed that realizing the problem was already an important step. The gentleman asked why she had come to town at such an inconvenient hour. He assumed she had business with him. Martina said she had meant to tell him something. At first she planned to show it to His Excellency, and if he showed interest she would offer it, so she extracted the honey gem and held it up. Admiring the box's contents, the Baron noted both their size and the striking movement of the exhibits, and everything looked magnificent, so Martina thanked him for his high praise. The man said he is not a jewelry collector. Understanding this and hoping to gain his favor, she said she would take the gems to the merchant guild to sell them for money. He was surprised she had decided to part with such a rare item. She said that after recent events and given her future plans, she needed to hire more security. He wondered if Stefana was coping. Martina said she needed a guard who would protect her son first and foremost. Besides, if anything happened to Fana, Master Barlin's servant, she would have no one to give orders to. She decided they should find a couple more servants before Stefano returned, and the man said good ones were hard to find. He decided to let Martina command Stefana, which would remove Stefana from her current role. The woman asked if he was sure of his decision. He said he was grateful because her help had made Rosanna his son's daughter-in-law. Martina asked whether Rosanna was still on the expedition, and he explained Rosanna had led a squad to clear out the monsters. The protagonist's mother remembered that she also stood out at the academy. 3 days had passed and her return was near. Martina was sent to speak with her because the Baron believed Rosanna's destiny was not war. Pausing as if nothing had changed, the heroine said that if monsters were involved, they could just hire mercenaries through a guild. The Baron said 3 days had passed, and their quick agreement to meet might mean something had happened. Martina returned to the family and told Stefano she now had the right to command. At first, Stefana didn't understand, but she was told she could prioritize Arthur to act more flexibly depending on the situation. Stefana had followed the hero's mother's orders, but now her own mother's instructions had to come first. Martina asked her son if he minded that the heroine was about to sell 7 honey gems. He nodded with approval, saying he trusted her, and Martina thanked him. They reached the merchant guild, and the boy, taking in the scene, said it looked like an old jewelry shop. At the entrance, the jeweler welcomed the young woman. The man insisted he never lies about women. Martina showed him the box and said she wanted to sell its contents. The protagonist peered out from behind his mother. Opening it, the man said they were honey gems and offered 1 silver coin, but Martina thought the price too low. She was told honey gemstones are usually used as jewelry and are worth little on their own, but in large quantities they become more valuable. Martina turned to Stefana, unexpectedly opened a second box and laid out a tray of small stones, and the jeweler was delighted to see the complete collection. The hero believed he had collected them entirely by accident. The jeweler found 24 in all, with a total value of 16 gold and 2 silver coins. Collecting small honey gems doubled their value, so it was important to finish the collection. The jeweler offered 17 gold pieces for the completed collection. They agreed. Martina took the bag of money and thanked the seller. They called after her that they'd be glad to see them again, and then fell silent. We advised them to come in whenever possible. The salesman sat across from the protagonist's mother and asked if the sale was complete. She said no and that she needed 2 servants or guards. The boy told Stefan he was a speed type and that they needed attack power and gathering experience, and his mother agreed, asking whether they could find suitable candidates who met those criteria. The boy asked why they needed such secure storage. The answer was that sometimes people posing as customers could be acting from a personal grudge against the servant. Those precautions were needed to protect the staff. The young man felt a sudden, intense fear when he heard that. The chief indicated the servants whose skills met the requirements, including 2 target shooters, a spearman, an axeman, and a hammerman. The boy said men were probably not right for the role because he couldn't stand how they looked at his mother. Martina suddenly noticed the girl in front of her. Martina asked who the stranger was. The girl moved closer to the woman. They told her a dwarf stood before them, hammer in hand. The little beauty watched Arthur closely, and their eyes met. The dwarf said leaving blacksmithing to become an adventurer let her reach rank C, but several failed missions saddled her with debt and forced her into service. The protagonist was surprised. She was a grown adventurer, but dwarves are short, which likely explained her situation. Martina asked what exactly she had. Pausing, she explained that her C rank let her gather, and that as a dwarf who wielded a hammer, she had considerable strength. Arthur noticed her lack of confidence and found it suspicious. The woman wondered why she had left blacksmithing and started failing missions. Her worsening vision was to blame, so she could no longer judge the condition of her hardware accurately, and in fights with monsters, she began missing her targets, now seeing only what was within reach. Martina looked down and felt regret. A dwarf with such poor eyesight was not fit to guard Arthur. The hero wondered if poor eyesight was a reason to give up and began to rethink his values. The boy went to his mother and whispered to her. Mom listened closely. Martina asked how much it would cost to care for her. The man said they only had 10 gold coins. Admitting he was of little use as a servant, he said dwarves were rare in the country and therefore expensive. Martina asked how many years it would take her to gain her freedom at that price. The man said the term would be a full 50 years. The condition was that she be supplied with alcohol. The heroes froze at the news. She required a jug a day, or at least a glass, or at worst once a week. A glass of ale cost 3 bronze coins. They realized this was unrealistic. Calculating that once a week would add up to only 7 gold coins over 50 years, the protagonist decided it was a good deal, and the boy said once a week was probably acceptable. Under that condition, she could have become Arthur's guard if she hadn't objected. The girl beamed with happiness and didn't know how to react. The dwarf assured her that, of course, she didn't mind. The heroes signed the contract and sealed the deal. Arthur introduced himself to the girl again, saying he was truly pleased to meet her. Lugina, a dwarf, introduced herself and said she'd be happy to serve, adding she hadn't tried it yet but could work nights. The protagonist saw the dwarves were fully absorbed in drink. Arthur's mother gave her name as Martina, and her friend was Stefana. Stefana said she served Baron Merlot and looked surprised to be serving such an important man. The next day, the heroes went shopping to try on clothes for the evening reception. Lugina beamed with happiness, studied the laws, and bought new clothes and a hammer. The heroes looked at different designs and admired the flowers. Having sampled the delicious pastries and savored the moment, they bought outfits and equipment for Lugina and decided to begin. The protagonist's mother and Stefan ran errands, leaving the boy to make glasses. Determined, the young man prepared himself and took out paper and a pen. Lugina could only see Arthur up close, so he diagnosed her as farsighted. Unable to do a proper eye exam, he made a set of concave lenses to try to correct her vision. Next, he had to form the alchemical circle. Sitting amid scattered papers at the table, the young man wrote down every suitable option. Gold, silver, and copper melted in the heating circle, but iron could not be melted, he read. The heating circle had a temperature limit, so he considered the melting point of quartz, which seemed heat-resistant, and suspected a longer heating period might be required. Starting with one seal, the young man saw the experiment failing, but continued and discovered that using 2 seals made everything melt smoothly. One seal reached 1,000 degrees Celsius, the melting point of copper, while quartz appeared to melt between 1,000 and 2,000 degrees, and the hero used molding and then flow. A voice called from behind, and the boy flinched. Lugina ran up, out of breath and confused about what was happening ahead. She asked him what he was actually doing. Arthur examined the manufactured lens and remained silent. Apologizing, he asked the girl if she had seen what he was doing. Lugina said she had, demanded an explanation, and loudly asked how such a glass piece had been made, and the young man laughed before beginning to explain from the very beginning. The boy explained materialization, the alchemical circle, and alchemy itself, showing how it all worked. He asked Lugina if she was okay, and Lugina stood stunned and confused before she went to Arthur and began shaking him. The dwarf shouted that she was completely out of order, but the woman did not understand what kind of alchemy this was and had never heard of materialization or any of this. The hero laughed, apologized, started sweating, and asked why he had worked that way while Lugina said it was impossible, muttered under her breath, and then shouted that she understood nothing and was stunned. A young man called from behind. The girl turned, and he said the glasses he had made must be kept secret from Stefana. The dwarf objected that she already knew he could do alchemy, and the hero said his mother had told him to keep it secret just in case. He said Stefana wasn't a spy, but sometimes it was better for her not to know for her own good. Lugina paused and asked the boy if Stefana was in a difficult situation. Smiling, he pointed to his desk with the lenses and said there was nothing he could do. He had to try them on, and the girl agreed happily. Holding the lens to her eye, she was startled as everything came into focus, and she called out that she could see, amazed that she could even make out distant objects. At first, the boy's face had been a blur to her, but now she could make out every feature, and the dwarf was overjoyed. Arthur said he hadn't expected such a strong reaction and asked whether the lenses would fit. The girl looked out the window and said she could see perfectly. What had been commonplace in the protagonist's past now seemed extraordinary here. Magic could not restore her sight, but he could help with alchemy, and when he said they had to keep working, she agreed that the frame should be round, so he chose silver instead of iron to avoid allergies. The boy returned to his alchemy, and Lugina tried the glasses again, finding the frames were the right size for her. The young man made protective goggles that adjusted easily with a fabric strap and used a mesh design to prevent fogging. Designed for combat, the girl put on the glasses and confirmed she could see clearly and comfortably. We tested it in real life. Glasses usually slip off during vigorous movement. The girl started jumping and moving to test it, but the glasses did not fall off. Arthur explained that with those glasses she could forge. The dwarf perked up at the snooze and ran to the boy. She tossed him in front of her, and Lugina, overjoyed that she could forge, began repeating it. Arthur suddenly struck her on the head and told her to calm down. The girl apologized. Although she was an adult, she still had plenty of strength. The boy turned to the dwarf and asked whether she knew anything about ovens. The girl said eagerly that they were gnomes, of course, and had learned to build ovens as children. The hero wondered who exactly she meant and whether it referred only to herself, but the woman apologized and said she was just being herself. The young man said she could speak however she felt most comfortable. Lugina said everything was clear and thanked him. Martina and Stefana returned home unexpectedly. The boy turned to his mother, greeted her, and wondered where Stefana was. Martina explained she was preparing the tavern for Lugina's welcome party. The heroes brightened. The former aristocrat was hosting a party for a servant. That was unexpected. Martina had clearly changed a lot during her years with Stefana. Arthur glanced at his mother as she gathered provisions for their small table. Martina noticed the glasses he was talking about. He said they were protective combat goggles and set a regular pair on the table. He explained that the shape and thickness of the lenses change how someone sees. He asked his mother to stop glaring at him so menacingly. Martina asked to see the protective goggles, and the dwarf agreed. The dwarf began to take them off her head. After showing them to her mother, she asked her to hold them. The protagonist turned and asked Lugina not to put on her glasses yet. Seeing redness around her eyes, the young man pointed it out, but she brushed it off as a minor issue, and Arthur warned that wearing glasses for long periods could make it worse. Looking for a material softer than leather, he had never come across rubber in this world. She asked if koa would be suitable, and he remembered the material existed. The dwarf said it was commonly used in forges. It was blended with a hardener to control its flexibility and absorb shock. The hero listened closely and understood everything. Martina called from behind, told the boys it was time to start the welcome party, and with Stefana set a large table and invited everyone to eat, which amazed Lugina and Arthur. They took a close look at the set table. All four sat down and began to discuss the news. Everyone enjoyed the delicious dishes, and Lugina drank a little. The beer tasted delicious, she said, the first time in a month. The hero was genuinely happy for her. Her mother took 3 days to recover from the hangover, and Stefana nursed her. Lugina turned to Mr. Arthur and decided to tell him something. She asked if the glasses were all right. Not yet used to people not knowing the glasses were there, she watched everyone assume it was a mask and stare at her. They stepped into the store and the salesman greeted them, asking what the heroes wanted this time. Then he looked ahead and grew thoughtful. The protagonist came forward and requested 10 pieces of koa material and 1 kilogram of hardener. The seller asked the young gentleman what the dwarf had on her face. The boy said it was a secret. The man laughed and offered candy to get the information. Arthur objected that candy was not a proper way to pay. The salesman looked upset and at a loss for words. Leaning toward the boys, he apologized and promised to bring everything they needed right away. Just then several more people came through the door, and the salesman stepped forward to hand them the goods they needed. The store manager apologized to Arthur for his employees' rude behavior. At first the hero didn't understand what was happening, but the influential man asked them to talk, suggesting the conference room, and Arthur countered that they were just chopping. The store manager insisted they not refuse because it was too noisy, and leaving without an explanation would have been difficult. The protagonist was unsure about agreeing to negotiate and feared that refusal might lead to force. At last he agreed, which delighted the merchant. They entered a small room and sat down. The man introduced himself as Haspert, owner of the Obsidian Merchant Guild branch. Speaking Merlot, the hero gave his name as Arthur. Lugina was surprised to recognize who it was. Haspert started by apologizing and gave them some coins for the incident. They thanked him. The man then asked if the protagonist agreed to be told about the mask and his companion. Arthur reminded them he had told the employee the matter was confidential. Recognizing the girl as Lugina, he asked if that was true. She shuddered. The man asked how the salesman knew who she was. The salesman said it was his job and that he'd heard she had poor eyesight, so he hadn't approached her directly. Arthur paused and everything fell into place. The glasses were probably silver and glass and could be copied over time, which explained why the mask had attracted so much interest. The hero briefly considered selling the information, but put it off, choosing to have a little fun and asking Lugenda to show him their new invention. The gnome took off her glasses and nodded to show she understood, then handed them to Haspert, who examined them carefully, looked surprised and called them a very interesting item, then asked in a decisive tone where he could get similar ones. Arthur knew a direct claim that he had made it himself wouldn't be taken seriously, so he said they weren't sold in stores. Surprised, Haspert asked how he could get them then. The man bent the truth a little to muddy the issue, saying someone had made and brought them, and he avoided a direct lie to keep from getting into trouble later. Haspert said that if they handed him this craftsman, he would give a 10% discount on all their guild's goods. The young man reminded them he had promised to keep the craftsman's identity secret. The shopkeeper noticed everyone was interested in the item. Only one girl wears it. He asked if it looked strange. The atmosphere suddenly turned ominous. The hero took it as a threat. It was risky, he said, and they would have to find a way around it. The young man laughed and suggested they ask for a meeting. The seller approved it, saying it was good and had to be delivered as soon as possible, and the man agreed. Later, the hero stayed in the guild. A young man stood up and said they were returning. Haspert asked him to hold on. He assured them he would provide security on the way back. 2 strong men stepped in front of the hero. Anything could happen in this world, so caution was essential. Arthur accepted this without protest. The guards asked where they should go. A man explained the route, left, then straight ahead. Having a man with a gun on his back felt terrifying. The hero did not want them to find where they were staying because he feared pursuit. He did not want to resort to extreme measures. Soon they arrived at Baron Merlot's mansion. The guards stared at him, confused about why they were there. A young man approached the guard at the entrance. He greeted the guard and said he was Arthur, Martina's son. The guard recognized him and returned the greeting. Realizing the guards would not leave, the hero announced that now he was home and everything was fine, bade them goodbye and sent them on their way as the guards trembled with indignation. The knight asked why he had come at all. Arthur said he had come to ask Tobias for help. Tears streamed down the boy's cheeks as he screamed that his mother had told him and Lugina to go ahead, but he was still afraid and begged them to bring his mother quickly, and he wasn't lying. The guard jumped up and said he would check everything immediately, but he was told to wait there. Lugina asked the hero what he planned to do next. He warned that without protection from the Baron's family, things could be dangerous. She noticed he seemed quite calm. Arthur threw up his hands and explained that if they were afraid of the unknown, so be it. In his view, the most dangerous thing is showing he can be intimidated. He couldn't take on such a large guild alone, so he had to prepare for the worst-case scenario. Knight hurried up to them, apologizing for the delay. He said he would meet the hero later and told the carriage to fetch Lady Martina. The protagonist exhaled, put a hand to his chest, and settled. Lugina stepped up behind him and smiled. After a while, Martina and Stefana ran up to him, calling his name. The young man flinched but called out to his mother. Clinging to him, the girl refused to let go and said she had heard he'd been at the Baron's mansion and was very worried. The boy apologized, saying he hadn't meant to use such a tactic but had no other choice. Mom hugged him tight and said the most important thing was that he was safe. The words hit Arthur hard. Returning, he began to cry, tears running down his cheeks as he clutched his mother's dress. Hugging him and stroking his head, she told him everything was fine. He said he felt helpless. Later, the heroes gathered in a large gazebo to talk about their relationship, and the young man asked his mother if everything was okay. Stefana and Lugina watched from the sidelines. Arthur hugged his mother and told her how ashamed he felt. Suddenly, he tried to climb down, but his mother told him to stay close because he could afford to be weaker at times like these, and he agreed. He recounted the day's events, explained the situation, and said he had not come here just for protection, which surprised Martino. He aimed to secure the rights to the information about the glasses because the trade guild couldn't be trusted. Thanks to his mother's connections with Rosanna, they would at least be heard. The young man asked his mother what she thought of the people from the House of Defense. The girl paused to choose her words. She found the Baron traditional but not stubborn, his wife a model wife and mother, Tobias overly serious and trusting, and Martina said Rosanna was fair and skilled in martial arts. Deciding they could tell Tobias everything, the young man met his mother's objection, as she insisted they had no other option. They sealed their agreement by joining their little fingers. Arthur asked his mother not to reveal his mastery of alchemy. Tobias apologized. The mother and her son bowed and thanked him for agreeing to meet. Tobias said he had been told about an unusual matter. Martinez smiled and suggested asking the strangers to leave before the meeting started. Tobias asked whether she trusted his servants. Declaring the matter commercial, the woman asked whether the gentleman would accept liability if an information leak occurred, since there were no patents in this world. The gentleman felt sorry, began sweating, and agreed. Tobias weighed the commercial benefit and asked whether the girl knew about the situation at her home. Martina didn't understand the question and asked for clarification. The young man paused, then had a sudden thought to himself. Quickly, he apologized to the guests and asked them to forget what he had said earlier. Martina said further discussion was impossible without considering the status of the baronial house. The young man clarified how much money was required. The girl replied that, at worst, they would need up to 80 platinum coins. Tobias stood up. His face darkened as he apologized, saying that 80 coins was unrealistic. Martina quickly reassured him, explaining this was the maximum and that 40 was usually enough. The Baron considered the sum of 40. The protagonist said he was willing to pay 40 platinum coins, but could not hide his intentions. Tobias raised his hands in frustration and asked how long it would take to recoup the investment if he invested 80. Martina said it would take 3 years at best and 5 years at worst, and the man was surprised it would happen so quickly. Arthur, however, said it looked like a scam and noted that building a glass furnace would take 6 months to a year, and the workers would have to keep the technical details secret. Tobias asked about the terms for 40 coins. The girl said they could not provide a glass furnace for that amount. The man paused, then asked if a basic workshop would be enough. Martina asked if he had one. During the capital's expansion, the hero said an abandoned glass workshop was left behind and needed repairs. Sipping tea, the protagonist asked about the city's glass workshops. The man said there was one that made window glass. Martina decided that in that case 40 platinum coins would be enough and they would not be competitors. Tobias asked about his share. Martina said it would be part of the profit as payment for the information provided. A letter of recommendation for the aristocratic academy was also required. Tobias read the recommendation and began to object, but Martina cut him off, saying her son wanted to attend university on his own and his parents had a duty to support his ambitions. Explaining he couldn't make that decision alone and needed to speak with his father, he asked the heroes to wait, stood up, and left the room. When the door closed behind him, Martina turned to her son and asked him for his thoughts on everything that was happening. The young man noticed Tobias's reaction wasn't bad, but the situation with the Baron was worrying, and he assumed it was about money, even though the taxes had been paid, and the Baron kept talking about some problem. Rosanna was absent again, and Tobias was also absent yesterday. Martina realized that everything now depended on the Baron's decision. The young man said they had not revealed any key information yet, so refusing would not be too damaging, and for their safety, he wanted the baronial house to take charge of the matter. Tobias came back and apologized again for the wait, saying he had brought his father to join the conversation. The Baron told Tobias to be more restrained, noting he had been too familiar during the negotiations, and Tobias apologized. Arthur realized he had just come back and was already being scolded. Martina apologized, saying they were once again wasting the gentleman's valuable time, and he explained he had not expected to meet the day after their previous meeting. Looking at the boy, the man asked him to explain first why a child was at the negotiations. Martina warned that the child was in danger. The Baron did not understand, but the girl confirmed it. Stefana started pouring tea, while voices in the background said it was a long story. Martina explained the whole situation, and Tobias thought it sounded like a warning, but could also be seen as safety advice. Nothing could be done on that basis. Arthur replied that this was exactly the truth, that no crimes had been committed, the guards were only guards, and the threat existed only in the young man's perception. With her hand over her heart, Martina said nothing needed to be done. Guilds that made such claims could not be trusted. They decided to delegate responsibility for the problem to someone else. The Baron asked if they could turn to another guild. The girl said he might be right, but because she feared betrayal, she preferred to stick with those she trusted, finding them more reliable. Arthur said his mother had been great and had explained everything perfectly. The gentleman assured him he understood and that the situation was clear, though he had heard glass was involved and did not know exactly how it worked or what the details were. Pausing, the girl gave examples like wine glasses and said those made from impure quartz sand were cloudy and cheap, costing only 5 silver coins. Glasses made from pieces of quartz, slightly white and average in price, cost 2 coins. Goblets made from select, pure quartz, the highest grade, were valued at 5 gold coins. With that information, they could make top-quality goblets for less than 1 gold coin. The Baron and his son beamed with anticipation and happiness. Martina said they first had to set up production of clear glass blanks from quartz sand, then sell them to other glass workshops as raw materials. The heroes wondered if they would have to make finished products from this glass themselves. She said it would be best to begin production once transparent glass became widely available, and he checked whether that was to avoid hostility, which she confirmed. They risked the guild's wrath, ruining the local glassworks and angering the townspeople. Once clear glass became common, other workshops could also produce high-quality products cheaply. The conversation had shifted from glass to another problem, and the Baron asked if there was anything else. The girl turned to Lucina. The gnome took off her glasses and said they were for correcting vision. They needed affordable, good-quality lenses. Arthur agreed that costly glasses would be pointless since few people could afford them. His mother agreed this was true. Other products besides glasses use lenses. Leaning back in his chair, the Baron said everything was now clear to him. He scratched his forehead, thinking it was a good idea. The man said it would not work out right away, but he was willing to pay 40 platinum coins to take on the project. Next, the contract issue came up, and they chose to split the profits first. Martina said 10% of the profits would be enough. The Baron, surprised by her generosity, asked whether she would be satisfied with those terms. Martina agreed, but added one more condition. She requested permission to use the Helbendorp forge and intended to ask Stefana as well. The man explained the forge was no problem, but did not understand why the girl needed a friend, so he asked Mrs. Martina if she knew about Stefana's situation. She declined, and the Baron said Stefana had been a criminal servant all her life, which surprised Martina and made her eyes widen. She lowered her head, startled, and took in the information. There were 3 types of criminal servants. Minor crimes such as theft and petty harm carried sentences of 3 to 10 years. Serious crimes like reckless manslaughter and causing serious injury carried sentences of 10 to 30 years, which were considered heavy. Premeditated murder carried a life sentence with hard labor. Servants like those were bought for dangerous work where they might die. They were considered disposable, but Stefano was treated differently. Martina looked at the gentlemen, wondering why this had happened. One of them said it was mostly pity. Turning to Stefana, he said she might not want to talk but needed to. Martina replied that there was no need to force her. The Baron said that if she wanted her to stay close, she had to know everything. She listened, looked down, and realized the gentleman was right. A knock sounded, and the girl rose from the sofa. Stamping her heels, she picked up Stefan and said she could manage after leaving the Viscount's house. She had money and a bright son, but she couldn't cook or wash. Her friend taught her how to do household chores and helped her with work in the fields. As a security guard, she didn't have to handle any of that. They developed a very warm and friendly relationship. Martina avoided digging into Stefana's past because she knew Stefana would return to her master, but she felt grateful and close to her, and if Stefana had not objected, Martina would have been glad to hear about her. The girl said her mistress's name, looked down, sighed, and began her story. Her father was an adventurer, and her mother worked as a registrar at the guild. Her family included a mother, a father, and a younger sister. Philomena and Stefan's parents warned them not to run too fast. The girls seemed to agree. They weren't rich, but back then their lives were full of happiness. One day they received terrible news that their husband had disappeared from the house, and in shock, the dishes fell and shattered on the floor. Stefana's father's party, called the Hardy, vanished without a trace and were presumed dead after the mission failed, leaving Stefana's mother struggling to work to support her daughters. Her health became grave and steadily worsened. Soon the family could no longer afford medicine. At 13, the heroine became an adventurer, but even that could not cure her mother's illness, and her mother died when Stefana was 15. Philomena was 15 and working as a saleswoman when her sister asked her to listen. She said her dream was to marry and help expand their stores, and that she would certainly repay her sister. Back then, Philomena was dating the shop owner's son, and Stefana said she didn't need to repay him. Being together was enough and made her happy, and she could not imagine that this happiness would one day be taken away. 6 months later, guards arrived at Philomena's home, asked if the house belonged to her, and she opened the door, confirmed it, asked why they had come, and stood stunned at the sight of the guards. She learned the terrible news about what had happened to her sister the day before. They found Philomena in the slums, apparently the victim of an attack. Stefana raced into the slums, telling herself it must be a mistake. Panting from running, she repeated it. In the end, it was all true. The heroine could not understand how it had happened. Standing before her dead sister, covered in flowers, she did not know what to do. Stefano was puzzled about why Philomena was the victim. At her sister's grave, she left flowers. The case was closed after officials concluded her sister had gone into the slums alone and no perpetrator was ever found. This felt strange. Philomena would never have gone there alone, since even Stefana was afraid to go there. There had to be some other reason. The girl got a sword, put on a cloak, and entered the guild. One boy noticed her. The heroine sought to hire an informant from the slums, mentioned she needed a cleaner, and handed over a bag of coins. A pipe-smoking mercenary said he handled petty love matters and showed her a portrait. Slum residents said he sold uniforms from that shop in the slums. When Stefano saw the offender, he was furious at the danger posed to Philomena. Still, the slum resident's testimony was rejected. The mercenary's employer remained free. The man added there was more information and said Philomena was apparently pregnant. The main character froze, unsure how to respond. Late at night, a man sat in the store, leaned back in his chair, sighed, and said he wanted a little more fun, but that solving the case would get him into trouble, then called Philomena stupid for not realizing she had been used. A knock sounded at the door, and the boy wondered who could be there at that hour. He opened it and asked who was looking for him. A cloaked girl stood in the doorway. Stefana pressed a knife to his throat and demanded he tell the truth, warning she would kill him if he lied. A worker revealed that the man already had a fiancée, but he treated Philomena like a plaything, and after she became pregnant, she fell into a trap as he conspired with his father and tricked his sister into going to the slums. That was where he killed her. The slums laws couldn't convict him. With a heavy heart, the heroine told Martin about it. She released her hands and said this was exactly why she had killed everyone with her own hands, and in that moment she remembered the past again. Martina asked whether she regretted taking revenge, and the girl looked down and said no, though she still did not know if it had been right. The protagonist's mother decided that was enough. In her view, there was no answer, and revenge was neither justice nor evil. You cannot escape responsibility for your actions. Martina held out her hand and asked the heroine to stay with her. Tears filled Stephanie's eyes. Touched by such kindness and respect, Stephanie agreed. Seeing this, the Baron said everything seemed decided and handed it to Stefan Martina. Martina thanked him. Arthur said the heroine could not be released from service, but he hoped they would become truly close as a family. They all sat down across from the Baron. He'll cover the losses and help out until the glass business gets off the ground. While in the provincial capital, they were allowed to live in the mansion, and because their goal was protection, it was a complete success that filled them with joy. The Baron said we should first find a glassmaker and an alchemist in the guild. Martina handled recruiting the team and said other tasks still needed to be done. The hero's mother asked Lugina to inspect the workshop's glass furnace, and Lugina agreed. An alchemist needed to choose the alchemical tools and at minimum prepare to test the furnace. Lugina made a disgruntled sound. Everyone turned and watched her closely. The bespectacled girl apologized as her stomach began to rumble, and she remembered the maid had promised to start preparing dinner. The gentleman stood up and said that from now on he wanted Tobias to take the lead. If it went well, it would boost Tobias's confidence. He said he would appoint Sebiance as his assistant to prevent any mishaps, noting that Sebiance, the head butler, could take care of the assistant's duties, and the girl said she understood. One group will go to the Slave Guild tomorrow, while the other heroes will go to the Obsidio Guild to reject their offer. The Lord therefore assigned Dieterich, the baronial night guard, to guard them, and warned that if the guild did not back down, he would deal with the matter himself. After hearing his speech, the girl paused for a moment and said, "In that case." Turning to Arthur, she finished the sentence by saying he should lead tomorrow's negotiations. His mother's words terrified the hero, and a mug of tea slipped from his hands as he screamed and wondered whether he really had to talk. Martina faced him, put her hands on his shoulders, and told him it was part of the experience, that she would be there for him and Mr. Baron could help if needed, so he should not worry and should just try. Arthur answered awkwardly that he understood her. Mrs. Tina said she had a question for Mr. Baron, and he looked at her and asked what it was. The girl admitted she had noticed a hectic atmosphere in the mansion yesterday. She asked him to tell her that something serious was going on. What worries her most is that Rosanna, who is raising the child, has been absent for several days. She met Mr. Baron's eyes. Mr. Baron said it was probably more than just curiosity. She had understood everything correctly, and knowing it would be revealed sooner or later, the Baron decided to tell the whole truth now. The gentleman said a pack of monsters destroyed Helbendorp a few days earlier. Mr. Arthur was greatly struck by his words. She repeated, saying it could really be Helbendorp. The hero remembered this village served as the base for building a road through the forest. The Baron explained that the defensive wall wasn't finished and couldn't be defended, so Rosanna set out to destroy the pack that had attacked it. The boy paused and asked how strong Rosanna was. His mother said Rosanna was about as strong as a royal guard. The hero's eyes brightened at Rosanna's strength. Mr. Baron added that they had also hired several groups of adventurers, just in case, since those teams were better at dealing with the forest. Martina suspected this explained the lack of funds. The man agreed with her and said destroying the monsters and rebuilding the village would cost a great deal. Arthur acknowledged he felt sorry for the ruined village, but he understood the situation. She stood and said that in that case, they would do everything possible to open the glass workshop as soon as possible. Martina and Baron shook hands. The heroes sat at the table. Mistress Tina turned to Lugina and Fauna, who were standing nearby, and told them they would eat with the heroes from now on. The two slaves were greatly surprised. Martina then listed the small details that only mattered when all four of them were a family. Eating separately was inefficient, and meals were a family affair, so she asked her to sit beside her at the table. Both heroines said they understood her. Everyone took their seats at the table. Mr. Arthur said after dinner that he was full, and it was time to practice his defense. Holding the gel-like substance in his hands, the boy asked if it absorbed shock, and the girl explained it was a magical stone named Koa because it was not slow. Lugina's gear had a fairly stiff coating, and for close-fitting glasses, foam rubber is ideal. Lugina told the hero the proportions were 10 grams of Koa material to 3 grams of hardener. Mr. Arthur said he wanted it softer, so he'd use a 10-to-2 ratio. Lugina asked why he was adding wheat grains, and the hero said it was a surprise and she'd see everything later. 5 minutes later, the hero realized it had failed. He mixed materialized wheat grains into koa material, and after it hardened, he removed the grains to form cavities, but the result was too loose. Arthur asked the girl whether he was firm enough. She said it felt too soft. He explained it was meant to be that way because if it were harder, the skin would rub. This time the boy chose sesame seeds instead of wheat. Pleased with the result, he decided he'd done an excellent job. Pleased, he announced it would be called foamed koa from now on. The girl cut in to say there were no bubbles, but the hero had planned it that way. It was meant to create atmosphere. The heroes replaced Lugina's glasses, and he asked how she felt. Lugina said happily that the glasses didn't slip even when she moved. Arthur said they'd test the glasses and at the same time improve the regular ones. Arthur took the glasses apart, remade them with alchemy so they folded on hinges, and replaced the new grass pads with a harder coal leaf. He also made a case for the glasses by gluing a precise koa sheet inside the cover, so they are now comfortable to wear. After looking at the gentleman, the girl said a jeweler was unnecessary. He replied that knives could not be made with alchemy. She asked again whether alchemy could really make knives, and he said you can shape a knife but not create an actual blade, because shaping cannot reach the precision needed to produce a sharp edge. Lugina asked if it was really impossible to sharpen a knife by alchemy, and the gentleman said the technique involved cutting, not the grinding required to hone a blade. Mr. Arthur knows only 10 techniques from the book: heating, cooling, compression, molding, cutting, synthesis, extraction, purification, separation, and aging. Choosing to search for more techniques later, the hero asked Lugina to explain the metals to him. The next day, Mr. Arthur entered the store and was greeted by a man. Mr. Arthur noticed the same salesman standing before him. Ono returned his greeting and asked if Heisberg was still there. They said they'd call him right away and asked him to wait in the meeting room. At last, a man with a mustache entered the room, sat opposite the heroes, and apologized for keeping them waiting. Tina and her son greeted the gentleman across from them, and he looked at Arthur with a thoughtful expression. Suddenly, he asked whether the girl in front of him had made those glasses. Heisberg was surprised by her beauty, but Arthur said she was his dear mother. The man apologized and said his father might have been a dwarf. The boy did not understand what the man meant and kept thinking about the man's explanation of why his father was a dwarf. Tina defended him and said this child had not a drop of dwarven blood. Caught off guard, Heisberg apologized again and explained that he spoke so politely and had such good manners the gentleman took him for a half-gnome. Memories from his past life made Arthur think about it. His appearance and inner world do not match. He wondered whether others thought he looked strange. At that moment, he pushed aside his earlier thoughts and told himself he couldn't get upset about this because he had to make his mother happy. The hero replied sharply that he would give Heisberg the answer to yesterday's question, and since Baron Merlot had learned about the glasses, he could now bring every question to the baronial house. Heisberg replied that he started the conversation, and even a baronial house cannot ignore that. Mr. Arthur went on to say that Heisberg had first asked to introduce the creator, and the boy had replied he would tell him that the gentleman before him wanted to meet, and that what the hero had just said was the answer. Repeating his question, the man asked when negotiations could begin and that they start urgently, but the hero did not understand which negotiations he meant. Heisberg stared at the man before him in surprise, then replied that he meant negotiating the sale of the manufacturing method. Arthur enjoyed the panic of the man in front of him and quietly wondered whether Heisberg had realized his mistake. The hero replied that he had only been asked to present it and that no one had told him the details of the negotiations. If he had truly wanted to buy the manufacturing method, he should have said so and bought the exclusive right to negotiate to keep others out. The man objected, saying they could have made much more profit. The boy said some things were more important than money and hoped Heisberg would understand. The man thought about the words and agreed to give in this time. Proving the wise decision, the hero heard Heisberg ask the gentleman to tell the Baron he was ready to help with any problems, and promised to pass on the message. Arthur was pleased with the deal. He thought they would no longer act openly. That benefited him greatly. Still, Heisberg doubted that her son truly had no dwarven blood. He asked about Mr. Arthur's age. The boy said his name was Arthur, and he was 5 years old. The heroes walked together as Arthur nervously asked how things were going, and they told him someone was following them. 3 cloaked men watched them, and the man said he felt no hostility from those behind them. Arthur realized Dietrich had not just suggested taking a detour for safety. He's an exceptionally capable guard knight. The girl asked whether the people behind were going to surrender, and they replied that they couldn't even be sure they were guild members. In a world without patents, ethical lines blur, and if someone copies or steals information, expect no sympathy. Arthur concluded, "We must protect the information at all costs." Edric turned to the man beside him and asked what they should do if those people kept following them. The boy said that if the others saw the glasses, they would easily recognize the material as glass. The hero chose to go straight to the glass workshop and ask the guard to take them there. The heroes reached the workshop, and Tina saw the area was mostly deserted. Arthur spotted 2 children around the corner. Seeing the gentleman's gaze, the guard knight warned that the children were likely from an orphanage. Mr. Baron supports these children, but the orphanages are tax-exempt, so too much aid causes resentment. Commoners' main tax is the poll tax, and everyone over 5 must pay it. The children at the orphanage don't have that kind of money. Children help around the orphanage until age 9, start working at 10, and by 13 must save money and leave. Almost no jobs remain for them. Dieterich cut Arthur off and said they mostly become adventurers, lower-class people, or just bandits. Arthur believed he would have become one of them if his mother had abandoned him. If she had left him then, he would have ended up just like those children. The heroes said they would inspect the workshop from the inside. Dietrich agreed to keep watch outside, saying they could count on him. Lugano was ordered to check the stove. Tina asked everyone to speak up if they noticed anything, and the heroes went inside. Arthur's mother said the building was solid enough to open a small shop, and her son replied that to protect the information it was best not to let anyone inside. He added that the workshop is used only for production, and sales are handled elsewhere. After calculating and planning, he found the building still needs to be rebuilt, with too many entrances and the work clearly visible, so he plans to install walls and magical ventilation devices. Lugina interrupted the boy and said the oven was working perfectly. The boy replied that, if so, they could return to the Baron's mansion and report it. The heroes made their way back to the mansion. A man waited for them in the Baron's room. He apologized for calling the heroes as soon as they returned, but first they had to explain this very room. The heroes watched him with obvious interest. The man said they built this room specifically to handle information on glassmaking because it used to be a shelter, and its defenses against intrusion had already been carefully planned. 3 small rooms were perfect for sleeping, and the cleaning was already done, so Mr. Arthur was surprised at how quickly they had worked. The gentleman said that only he and the Sebians have the room key, so no one else can enter. Tina asked whether this had been a shelter and if there should be a secret entrance or exit. He said the way the heroes had entered was the secret entrance, and the main one had been sealed long ago. The girl said they had nothing to worry about in that case. The Baron was pleased they liked everything. Arthur thought it looked like a secret base. The Baron was now ready to hear the heroes' report. Tina began the story with the Obsidio Guild. In the end they relented, but it did not seem like a full surrender. The girls said they were being followed, so the followers were probably still looking for information. The Baron knew they had to stay on guard. She went on to say that because of the surveillance, they decided to create a plan to rebuild the glass workshop to prevent information leaks. Tina said she was unsure about the plan and asked him to review it. Baron promised to review their ideas. After reviewing the drawings, the gentleman said their plan was interesting and well organized. He added that only how to recruit people remained to be decided. They had already found an alchemist, but there was still no glacier. Arthur says they chose operational staff from people linked to the Baronal House, assigning assistants and a general manager to run operations, but the master craftsmen themselves are harder to find. The Baron said that if they were not in the province, they would have to search beyond it, which could take a long time. Knowing nothing could be done, the hero said he would have to wait because the masters were important. The gentleman said that was all for now and asked his servant Sibians if he had anything to add. With the Baron's permission, he said he would like to suggest it might be better to take on training the alchemists. The Baron objected, saying it sounded easy in words, but he had no children now who could be taught from scratch. Sibians volunteered to educate the orphans. The gentleman asked again whether he truly wanted to train orphans as alchemists, but Sabian was unsure. Since they were still children, they could be trained and might become successful alchemists, he added. He still wasn't sure if the orphans could learn alchemy. The Baron decided this hypothesis could be tested. Training could increase magical power, and knowledge of letters and arithmetic would be useful later, even if they did not become alchemists. The hero decided it was time to stop for the day. The gentleman said he'd been thinking since yesterday and was already very tired. 2 days later, holding items in her hands, Lugina asks Arthur which is better. He looks at the girl with little interest and says nothing. The hero admits that even though he's Lugina's boss, he completely forgot to buy her underwear and apologizes to her. Today they came to buy groceries for Lugina. Mr. Arthur doesn't like the items on display in stores. Then he asked Lugina if there was a special fabric that could stretch and contract, and she repeated his question. The girl said the fabric was made of threads, and threads alone cannot stretch or shrink, so that fabric could not exist. She kept asking the boy which of the two was better. Pointing at the shorts, Arthur's answer upset the girl. Then his mother came to him with 2 skirts and asked which one was better. Lugina watched the boy and his mother, Martina, from the side as he said the second skirt had the better color because bright colors were more appealing. Her master offended the girl, and when he asked what had happened, she said nothing had. After shopping, Tina told Arthur that from now on he would need to do more of his own shopping, and the money on the card she gave him was entirely his to manage. Thanking her, the boy asked how much money it held. Tina said there was 1 white silver coin. Arthur was stunned to learn a single white silver coin is worth 6 million yen, an amount he could easily handle himself. Tina said the child's support was separate, so he didn't have to worry about it. Arthur still couldn't believe how much money the Marquis was giving him. At first he thought the Marquis was a ruthless man, but it turned out otherwise. He wondered why he believed that about someone he had never met. Workers were rebuilding the glass workshop. The man told Arthur that the experiment with soundproofing Koa showed that during a normal conversation, nothing could be heard from the outside. If you speak loudly, you can hear the man say something, but you can't make out the words. Arthur thanked the man and asked how thick the coal sheet used in the experiment was. He said the thinnest was 5, because gluing a 10-coal sheet to the walls and ceiling makes it peel and tear under its own weight. Arthur thought this was a problem. If the thin sheet mostly blocks understanding of the conversation, that should be enough. He kept thinking about it, noting elastic fabrics, coal-based metal treatment, and other items on the list, and he had plenty of topics for his research. Later, Tina told Arthur that Tobias said Rose would return today. She said she might already be there when they came back. Arthur remembered that Rosanna was a master of body enhancement magic, and the way she swung her huge sword, sweeping every enemy from her path, earned her a memorable nickname. Walking ahead, Rose went down the stairs and greeted her sister Tina. She was nicknamed the Little Princess Spirit Killer. Together, the heroes lifted their glasses. Everyone sat together at the table. Feeling nervous, Arthur sat at the table with the other aristocrats, even though his mother had taught him manners. Beside him sat the head of the Tunisian baronial house, who said he was annoyed with Foldrop, but that the glass-making business had at last given them hope of restoration. Although familiar with most people, the hero was formally introduced to the whole family. Tunis and Juliana are the oldest members of the family. Tobias is the older brother. Hurt is the younger brother. Rosanna is Tobias's wife. Marnix is their second son. The baronial family includes 6 people. Tunis asked why Martina wanted to send Arthur to the academy. The girl explained Arthur himself wanted this and wanted to study alchemy. Tunisia said alchemy required more than the water attribute. Tina replied that alchemy books do not specify any attribute requirements. Creating alchemical lands requires them, but alchemy can still work without them. Tunisia asked whether the book on alchemy mentioned it, but the girl left the rest to the man's imagination. Arthur realized that while she was avoiding the question, he had simply assumed alchemy recipes did not mention attributes. Arthur's mother went on to say that Al's lack of attributes doesn't mean he lacks magical power, and she truly believes he will become an outstanding alchemist. Inspired by Tina's words, her sister stood and vowed to train Marl into a swordsman who could one day surpass Tina. When dinner ended, the servants cleared the tables. A man walked in, greeted them, and introduced himself as Rambo. Martina introduced herself to the guest and invited him to sit with them at the table. Rumba was taken aback by her proposal. Once more, the head of the baronial house ordered him to sit, as Martina had allowed, and the boy said he understood. Awkwardly, he sat among the other heroes. Rambo studied in the Noble Academy's alchemy department, but was sold to a slave guild. Arthur heard the circumstances of Rambo's sale were complicated. Martina said today she would explain the alchemist's role in glassmaking and relate it to Rambo's skills. She asked the boy if he understood the alchemist's exact role in glassmaking, and he said he understood everything. The idea is to purify liquid glass and shape it into a lens, and the girl replied that he was exactly right and asked whether he had any questions or suggestions about it. Rampu paused before answering. Tunisia told the man to speak his mind because there was nothing wrong with it. Frankly, he told the other heroes, he found this work humiliating for an alchemist. Martina asked him what was wrong. The alchemist said that if it was only about refining and shaping, even someone of copper rank who did not call themselves an alchemist could do it. Arthur asked what copper rank meant. They told him the alchemy department had 3 ranks, copper, silver, and gold, and he had to collect all the badges to earn a diploma of completion. Rambo is only a copper rank, so he doesn't count himself, but a true alchemist would refuse that work. Arthur realized it was better to look for alchemists like Rambo, and that there was no point in pursuing those who only held the title of alchemist. He decided to tell Topias this. The heroes stood in a glass workshop as a man ordered a young alchemist to get to work. Rambut put his alchemical abilities to use. Others also began working with glass. After pouring the glass into a separate mold, they waited for it to cool. Arthur figured Rambo could perform alchemical processing about 15 to 20 times a day. That wouldn't be enough, so they brought in Olaf, a copper-ranked alchemist, and now the two worked together. No glassblowers were available in the area, so they had to ask Corbus, who was already retired. They also decided to teach the slaves the craft of glassblowing. Ofst, 21, Fritz, 19, Dirk, 17, Melchio, 17. Fritz was surprised by how few impurities there were, and they told him it was a special quartz sand used for windows. The other heroes were surprised because this sand comes from Donato's bare knee, a region of solid mountains. Tobias said the barony of Donato had rocky mountains and dense forests and low food self-sufficiency, and finding a mine could dramatically improve the territory's finances. A man asked Tobias why they shouldn't look for mines then, and Tobias said there were more important tasks. We must build a road to the Mellow Barony. Fulanadrop served as a village for this purpose. The monsters destroyed the village. The project was delayed. Arthur thought the road might also help glassmaking, which would mean Tobias would have to work harder. The alchemists continued working on the glass. One of them said it looked very beautiful and that the next step was to mold the lenses. At last, the heroes make a lens. The guys were saying that, for the first time, it was a pretty good lens, but Arthur wasn't listening because something off to the side caught his attention. Lashina told the gentleman that the lens looked a little odd. Lifting the glass, she looked at it more closely. Placing the lens on a checkered board, the girl pointed out a defect in the glass and discovered its thickness was uneven, so the image changed with the lens position. The heroes were disappointed when their first attempt failed. The girl told them that production begins with failures, and they must keep trying until they achieve the desired result. A week later, they had made the perfect lens. Arthur said revising the molding process taught them how to produce lenses consistently without distortion. Despite a smaller initial investment than planned, profits are likely to exceed expectations. An arrow suddenly struck a spider in the forest. The heroes moved through the forest, flanked by guards. Lucina turned to Arthur, who had approached the spider, and asked if he really planned to touch it. Arthur replied that it was necessary because silk comes from silkworm cocoons. Expecting to need it, the hero cut off part of the spider. The others stared at him in horror. One archer said she had fired to avoid hurting his belly and called Arthur a very strange child. The hero thought that even if he could make a thread from it, people probably would not want to use it. The guards said they would explore the forest and return later, and Martina thanked them for their help and said she was heading home. Martina found the house in disarray and said they needed to clean up immediately since they hadn't been there for over a month. The heroes started cleaning the house. Exhausted from work, the two girls fell asleep. Meanwhile, Mr. Arthur spoke about his own work. A piece of the spider he had taken from the forest lay before him. Arthur told himself to get to work. Mr. Arthur spent several hours before dark trying to make a thread. Eventually, he collects samples of the thread fluid and the organ that produces it. Lugina ran up to him on the street and asked if the gentleman had seen the time, and Arthur told her to look at the result of his long, hard work. He showed her the thread inside his body was liquid, and for now called it a thread-like sac. Lugina looked at him and told him to go wash and change immediately. He finished by saying the thread-like sac is also covered in mucus. Just outside the village, the guards found something terrible. A huge monster threatened a man that day. A hunter vanished without a trace in the Helmendorf Mountains. Arthur was eating inside the house when something caught his attention. He remembered falling asleep after work as if he'd lost consciousness, since a 5-year-old's body couldn't cope with a full day's work. Properly dissecting spiders requires surgical instruments. The hero planned to ask Lugina later to craft tools for his future research. They arrived in the village of Milf. A man holding a glass asked about the forge. He asked whether they really needed a dwarven blacksmith, because Arthur had asked him to use the forge, but the man said it belonged to the Baron. Arthur pointed to the paper and said his mother had received the Baron's permission when they accepted Lugina. He told himself he had indeed shown a sheet of paper stating a fee for information about the glass. The hero stood hesitantly, waiting for the man's answer, told that the forge could be used only if the Baron gave permission, but that the Baron had no right to refuse him. Arthur was warned that if the forge began working, they might start ordering goods they once bought from merchants, and the boy silently agreed that this was true. Helsedorf sits on the outskirts and is remote, so fuel delivery is costly and commodity prices are rising, making items forged in the village more expensive than ready-made goods from merchants who produce more and sell much cheaper. The blacksmiths had no work left, and the forge eventually closed. Forge production may now become cheaper for a single reason. Lugina, the blacksmith, is a slave. Because slaves are not paid, villagers may expect her to work for free, so they will need to be tougher to avoid being taken advantage of. Lugina has other responsibilities, so she can only do blacksmithing 1 or 2 days a week. The man pushed back against Arthur and asked if he truly wasn't going to use the dwarf to help the village. The boy kept defending Lugina, insisting she was part of his family, that blacksmithing helped support them, and that custom blacksmithing orders were only a side job. Instead, the man kept pressing. She asked how many extra orders the girl could handle. Arthur said it was just simple repairs and nothing more, and that they would not work for free, so those orders would get low priority. The other man doubted the villagers would accept his rules. Arthur stood his ground and said they would have to be convinced. There simply would not be enough iron and fuel. Hearing that, the man grew thoughtful. Agreeing to tell the villagers what he had said, he received Arthur's sincere thanks. After that, the boy went home, knowing the forge could be started at any moment. When the hero stepped into the house, everyone looked at him with clear disappointment. They were dejected, and his mother called his name anxiously. He asked right away what had happened, and Martina said the hunter Hino apparently hadn't returned from the forest. Those words stunned Arthur. This hunter usually returns after midday, but that time has passed and he is still missing. The boy stared at his mother in horror as she told him that if the hunter did not come back, soon a search party would go out tomorrow morning and Fauna would be asked to join them. Arthur wondered why Fauna had to go since she was not in the militia, and it turned out that even though she was a slave, she could not refuse the military draft. The hero worried the draft might take Lugina too, but Martina said Lugina was probably listed as a blacksmith, so no one mentioned her. She was worried the hunter was only 3 hours late, but that delay had already sparked a violent reaction because the full drop had everyone on edge. Arthur stepped up to the slave and asked if she could handle it alone. Reassuring him that everything would be fine, she said she'd been told where Hino usually went and wouldn't have to go very far. Nervous, the boy clenched his fist. He told Lugina to open the forge at once. Lugina looked at him, puzzled. To fauna from the slave's silver. His words surprised both girls. He explained that Stephanus's sword was ordinary iron, but if she still had to fight monsters, she would need a much stronger sword. Arthur decided that because he could neither fence nor cast spells, he would make a worthy sword for her. The boy asked Fauna for her sword so he could improve it, but she did not answer. Something in her expression caught his attention. Lugina ran to ready the axe. Fauna drew the hero close and hugged him. She gave him her thanks. Turning back, he smiled softly at her. Arthur and Lugina went to forge a sword. The hero considered Stefan's request. He remembered her saying the sword's center of gravity should be 2 fists from the blade's base, and that good cutting strikes take priority. Black hard silver, known as dwarven silver, is twice as strong as iron, resists higher temperatures, and can only be smelted in a special dwarven furnace. A simple village oven won't work for this. Here the hero's alchemy comes in handy. If you set up the heating to reach 9,000 degrees, the metal should melt. Worried that Lugina hadn't been blacksmithing lately, the boy asked if she was all right, and she said she was fine because a dwarf who had forgotten his blacksmithing skills wasn't really a dwarf. Arthur was taken aback by her joke, but she treated it lightly. The hero promised to treat her to the best wine if she finished Fauna's sword by morning. Speeding up in an instant, the girl shouted that it was serious and she had to finish it immediately. Arthur realized he might have been hasty with his reward. The heroes arrived at the forge. He asked his partner how they would make this sword. The girl said she wanted him to make a sphere covering the area on the left of the axe. Normally, the metal is melted and poured into a mold, but this time they will fold the metal to increase its cutting force. At first, the hero compared it to forging a Japanese sword, and she told him to only heat it, since hard black silver is not like glass and must not be refined, or it will be ruined. When he asked whether the black solid silver was an alloy, she said yes, and added that the alloy's additive was a dwarven secret. Arthur absorbed Lugina's words and concluded it was probably a dwarven monopoly. In a loud voice, the girl ordered them to begin. The hero learned alchemy. The girl began showing her blacksmithing skills. Nearly red, the metal still needed more heat. Arthur then decided to add another circuit to raise the heating temperature. She ordered them to heat it a little more until the black spots on the metal disappeared. A little more heat was all it needed for a better result. Lugina shouted that it was time and began forging the metal. The heroes put a lot of effort into the metal. The heroes had been working at the forge for some time. Arthur noted they had already been stacking metal for half an hour and asked how much longer it would take. Lashana said it would take another 3 hours. Fauna arrived carrying a basket to check on the heroes. She set the basket beside them. After that, the girl left, and the heroes did not notice that she had come to visit them. Eventually, the metal was ready. Lugina said the folding was done and they should take a break. She ran outside to get some fresh air. Arthur knew things were bad because maintaining the alchemical circle used up a lot of mana. The moment the heroes stepped outside, they saw the basket Stefana had left. The basket held food and a note telling them not to overexert themselves. Stephanie's gift thrilled the heroes. They exchanged looks of joy and gratitude. While on break, the heroes help outside. Then the girl said the temperature needed to be adjusted. Arthur said he understood her and waited for further instructions. Realizing the pattern's size couldn't be changed on the fly, he decided to try adjusting the mana. The hero returned to work. Lugina gradually asked to lower the temperature, and Arthur obeyed her. Keeping track of time was hard for the hero. He slowly lowered the temperature. Without warning, the girl ordered him to turn the heat up to the maximum. The sword shifted color. Lugina kept forging weapons to get better results. Together, they set out to craft the perfect sword for their friend Stephanie. At last, the heroes completed another stage of the sword's creation, and Lugina said they had done an excellent job. Arthur asked if the blade was ready, and she said not yet. Once she answered, the boy collapsed from exhaustion. Arthur woke up at his house. He lay in bed. Martina entered his room. On seeing her, he started asking many questions about Lugina, Stefana, and the sword. Martina told her son to calm down because the sword was ready and had already been given to Fania. Arthur was upset he didn't get to see the sword they made. Lady Martina warned him he had used too much mana on the sword, but Fauna remained very grateful to him and Lugina for the work they had done. She said Lugina was already asleep. The boy asked whether Haino had not returned, and his mother confirmed that she had not. If it's not an accident but an attack, the consequences will be entirely different depending on whether the attacker is a person or an animal. Though Fuhlendorp was far, the hero thought it was still a neighboring village, so it was unlikely the monster that attacked it had come here too. While Martina and Arthur went down the stairs, they heard a crash. Lugina ran ahead to the door, and the boy asked if she was already awake. She feared the worst, but Fauna walked in. Tattered, filthy clothes hung on her. The heroes were terrified to see her like that. Arthur shouted that she needed help right away, but the girl said everything was fine and then turned to Mrs. Tina. She said Hannah appeared to have been attacked by orcs. Following the tracks, she found a group of orcs. She announced the orc group numbered as many as 50. Over 50 orcs can attack their village. Hearing those words stunned the heroes. Fauna told the heroes that messengers had already been sent to the militia and the city's defenses had been bolstered, but it still was not enough. They encountered a small group of orcs and continued their reconnaissance to find out their exact number. The bass they finally found was very large. The number of orcs is much higher if the database still contains orcs they have not found. Before she finished speaking, a terrifying howl from the orcs cut her off. The sound echoed through the city, and the heroes realized the orcs were already advancing. Fauna dashed out of the house, while Arthur shouted that this couldn't be happening. She shouted that the orcs had already reached the pole, and they had to evacuate immediately. Martina ordered her son to take only the essentials, and said Fauna and Lugina were also preparing to evacuate. People gathered to discuss next steps. Martina asked the man across from her what was happening because she needed to know if they might have to fight. The man asked her if the dwarf was not a blacksmith, since the dwarf was still an S-rank adventurer. Folding his arms, he asked the man behind him to explain, but hesitated. The young man began explaining the situation. They were gathering their forces at the southwest gate because it was closest to the forest and most likely to be attacked, while the northeast gate was blocked and guarded by the remaining militia and a few volunteers. Martina asked if they had sent a request to the Baronese capital, and they said they had, but reinforcements would not arrive for at least 3 days. He said they had to hold out for now, and that attacking immediately would mean certain death. Arthur realized that if the request reached the baronial house sooner, it would go straight to Rosanna, so they had to hold out until then. The young man ordered the slaves to defend the southwest gate and obey him, but the heroes looked at him with visible irritation. Martina approached the girls, told them that both she and Arthur believed in them, and let them decide what to do. Fauna replied that they should rely on her, and Lugina backed her up. The man beside them looked at them, thought about something, and stayed silent. Before dawn the next morning, the orcs attacked, trying to force their way through the fortress's southwestern gate. Those above fought to defend themselves with all their strength. Someone called for more support. From the sidelines, Martina and Arthur watched the panic sweep the city. People shouted, as expected, that orcs had attacked the southwest gate. Another man shouted for the wounded to be carried. The heroes feared for their loved ones and for the entire city. Something to his side caught the boy's attention, and he screamed, not knowing what was happening. He wondered why the orcs were attacking from the northeastern gate and feared the defenses there were much weaker. The crowd shouted for everyone to keep the orcs out and to hold the gates with all their strength. A massive boulder was hurled straight into the city. When St. Arthur saw a huge boulder blocking the city street, he thought that if this kept happening, the rocks would soon break into the city. The child pleaded with the gods to help them. Another man stood up and shouted for everyone to calm down immediately. Martina told her son she would defend the shelter entrance, and he reacted in horror because she had never fought before. With confidence, she looked at him and said everything was in perfect order, then asked him for something before the militia arrived. Arthur looked at his mother with sadness. The boy took her hand and refused to let her go into battle. Martina slipped his hand into hers. Releasing her child's hand, she asked him to stay here while she fought. Watching his mother walk farther away, Arthur realized she had no combat experience, since she had only studied attack magic at the Noble Academy and had never been in an actual battle. Behind the hero, people began to shout as a large crowd, led by a man, moved up to defend on 2 sides, along the wall and above the gate itself. The boy shouted happily that the militia had returned and his mother would not have to fight. Running forward with joy, he shouted over his mother's shoulder that the militia was already here. She only wanted to turn around. An orc stood behind her and swung a heavy cobblestone at the girl. Moments later, the cobblestone was hurled into the air and shot forward. A stone appeared above Mrs. Martina's head at that very moment. Gripped by terror, Arthur raised his hand with the alchemical circle and created a materialization. A stone wall sprang up from the ground, shielding Martina's back. The rock hit the fence and broke it, striking both heroes. Arthur was knocked back and hit the ground several times. The blow left the hero motionless on the ground. Forcing his eyes open, he saw his mother lying in front of him. He tried to call to her, but no sound came. They shouted to shut the gates immediately and not let a single orc get inside. Moments later, monsters broke down the gates and threw the people nearby aside. Stuck in the ground, the men could not get out. They were battered and exhausted. One of the orcs swung his weapon over the boy's head. Arthur lay on the ground and looked ahead. He suddenly saw a townsperson in danger and a monster about to strike him. Across from where his mother lay, another orc moved closer. He lifted his hand over her. Arthur stood up when he saw it and shouted to his mother to run. Pinned to the ground, Martina couldn't get up as the orc in front of her bent down toward her. The boy was having more trouble staying conscious, and his eyes were getting cloudy. At the last moment, an orc appeared before him and swung his weapon at him. A man suddenly appeared and shoved the huge orc away from the hero. Arthur admired the man before him, and the man, without looking at him, said Arthur must have made it just in time. They praised him, saying he was a good boy. Arthur felt his chest tighten from an oppressive feeling that turned out to be fear. The man apologized to him and said it would all be over soon. Moments later, the man was already gone. Arthur assumed that because the man had saved him, he was likely not his enemy. Fear gripped him more now than when the monster nearly crushed him, and his body still trembled. The orcs kept attacking people. That man handled them easily, confronting the monsters by himself. Several orcs attacked him from multiple directions, but he calmly defeated them instantly. The unknown man fought with steady resolve and beat every enemy. No orc could stand against this stranger's strength. The stranger's blade killed with the first strike. Later, Lugina and Fauna searched the city streets for Mr. Tina and Mr. Arthur, shouting for their change. The boy could not answer their cries as his vision dimmed, and the girls found their hero and shouted that he was badly hurt and needed immediate treatment. Arthur lost consciousness, but after a while he woke and Rosanna stood beside him, relieved that he had regained consciousness. Surprised, he looked at her as she said he had slept for 5 whole days. He suddenly remembered his mother and asked what was wrong with her and where she was, and the girl said Martina was resting nearby with a broken left arm. Suddenly, the man came to Arthur's bed and asked if he was finally awake. The man who had saved the city from the orcs appeared, and Arthur's eyes lit up. A second later, the boy passed out again. She shouted his name all through the house. Rosanna said angrily that the man had scared the boy, so he was thrown out of the house. Arthur asked who it was. The girl then explained this was a vessel, that he was an A-rank adventurer, and that his nickname was Instant No Meal. This time the attack on the northwest gate was led by a special kind of orc called a dist orc, she continued. The Adventurers Guild classifies orcs as recommended for destruction because they are enormously strong and love to destroy. After hearing this, Arthur asked whether the village was all right, because the orcs had been breaking into it in large numbers since that day. Rosanna smiled at him and said everything was fine. That same day he had wiped out all the orcs. The boy thought he was truly incredible. She said he was eventually rescued, but it seemed her sister had called the adventurer about something else. She told him she was grateful this time, but Arthur did not understand and assumed she probably did not like him. The boy asked what Vessel was doing at that moment. Rosanna said she had asked him to destroy the orc settlement and scout the surrounding area, and the boy was surprised because he had expected adventurers of her rank to be treated differently. The girl reassured him he had nothing to worry about, that he should recover first and everything else would follow, so she urged him to get well as soon as possible. 1 week has passed. Crews removed the destroyed gates and barricades, and the village returned to normal life. Meanwhile, the boy studied every day, struggling with his books to get into the Nobel Academy. He added that his mother had apparently called Vessel to give her the book he was studying. Eventually, he was able to officially greet the adventurer, and the fear came from the adventurer, overflowing with mana at that moment. Amid the hustle and bustle, he turned 6 and felt he had nothing to celebrate besides his age. Besides, the liquid he made from the spider's belly had gone bad. A month went by quickly. After Arthur recovered, Lugina hugged him tightly and cried with joy, relieved that they had both finally made a full recovery. He thanked Lugina for caring for him, but admitted he sometimes felt awkward around her. Arthur admitted that at the time, he never fully understood the relationship between Vessel and his mother. After everything that's happened, Arthur starts training with Wessel today. On seeing the wooden sword, the man admitted it was hard for him to say. At first, Arthur could not find a suitable weapon. Surprised, the boy asked whether he really did not even need a sword. Wessel answered yes and said it was best if the boy used no weapons. His words deeply upset the hero. The adventure made clear there are 2 kinds of people, reflexive actors and deliberate ones. Arthur is clearly that deliberate type, and magic suits him best. Now the boy's top priority is learning to run. He said fleeing can be a valid defense, so he must first train to run. Arthur was deeply upset, convinced he was completely unfit for combat, and even if training mattered to him, the hero would still continue his research. Tests showed liquid A made silk, liquid B acted like a stretchy thread, and C and D were sticky, so the question was how to turn A and B into thread. Lugina looked sadly at the focused Arthur. She asked her master whether he was still thinking about his research. He realized Lugina was enjoying herself. She asked him to stop thinking about spiders, at least while eating. Martina asked them both to calm down and said that after the incident with the orcs, many people had become interested in Arthur. Children his age come to see him too. Martina had a good idea. If he had friends his own age, he would play outside with them more often. Arthur felt embarrassed, but said that was probably true. Arthur's tasks seemed to be increasing, including training, research, and relationships with people. Out in the yard, a boy waved a stick and shouted that he was an instant sword and that the evil orc should fear him. Arthur stepped forward, and a boy immediately aimed a stick at him. At first, the hero did not understand what the man across from him wanted. After getting his bearings, he lay down on the ground and screamed that he had been beaten. The boy put his foot on the hero and shouted that he would one day become instantly swordless. Arthur explained the boy was Rodebel, and the story of how Vessel saved the village became so popular with children they even acted out. To the hero, Vessel seems like a messy, free-spirited person. The boy turned to Al and asked to be taught as well, since the mighty swordless one was teaching him to fight. The hero agreed, saying beforehand that it would be boring. Start by standing on one leg. For children, strength matters less than body control. Next, Arthur extends his leg forward until it is horizontal, then alternates legs by moving each from front to back and back to front to strengthen the body. Rodable did what he was told, but eventually said it was boring and asked him to play instant swordless again. The boy began to play. Back home, Arthur sat in front of a pile of papers and started thinking. Since reproducing the organ that makes spider silk is impossible, cut grooves from the center to the edges of a round plate and cover it with a lid. Rotation's centrifugal force spins the material into a thread that must be released at that spot, like a cotton candy machine. Al showed Lugina his drawing. Lugina studied it carefully. He asked the girl for her opinion on his idea. She said the thread engraving was too fine for her weak eyes, but she could make the rotating mechanism using gears. Delighted, Arthur said he would entrust the task to her, and then asked what metal would be best for the disc. Tind replied calmly that they needed a metal that could be shaped and used to cut grooves. Light, hard iron would work best. I couldn't tell what she meant by quote, in light iron. The girl said it was a metal as strong as iron but lighter. It's rare and hard to process, so seldom used but perfect for Arthur's task. Lugina said they would use the leftover dwarven silver to make engraving tools, and Al was delighted and ready to make them with her. The heroes get to work at the forge, crafting the items needed for the heroes' research. The object they had made stood before them. The main problem is the thread, because the previous one broke as soon as Arthur picked it up. Lugina then placed a certain uterus into the device. A thread slowly began to emerge. She took a piece and asked the hero what he thought. Al looked closely and said it was thread made from a liquid. It was not as smooth as silk, but it was shiny and quite strong. Lugina began explaining that as liquid be. The hero thought it wasn't as elastic as rubber, but it did stretch, and he told the girl that if he made fabric from it, he could make elastic clothing. Al announced they needed to make even more thread, but Lugina objected because they no longer had the raw material. Arthur smiled and said they'd have to hunt many spiders. Horrified, Lugina screamed. After the heroes gathered enough materials, the boy planned the best way to start their work. He said they now had to figure out how to turn it into fabric and clothing, and they needed someone in the village who knew how to weave. Lugina told him there was no loom in the village, that all the fabric was bought from merchants, and the boy agreed. The hero said out loud that going to Meliustat to make the fabric would take too long, and he figured he should do what they did with the glassworks and just sell it to someone who could make it for them. Right then, Lugina remembered something. Grabbing his shirt, she made the boy scream. The girl screamed in his face, accusing him of having no attachment to the things he made himself. Arthur stared at her, shocked. She admitted she also didn't like spiders, but she enjoyed doing things with him. There was no way she could refuse it. Before she could finish speaking, something clicked at the back of her neck. Falling to the floor, the girl frightened Arthur.